Welcome, broadcasting to the entirety of the Super Smash Bros. Community. This is Beyond the Metagame. I'm your host, Peon, this week live from a fun one, Poke-a-Floats. I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, AV. AV, how you doing, big guy?
All I gotta say is, if Poke-a-Floats was so good, why isn't there a Poke-a-Floats 2?
I mean, dude, you saw what happened at Pokemon Stadium 2. Look, man, you took
Alright,
a perfectly, well, maybe not perfectly, but a somehow legal stage into just some gunk.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So some things don't deserve a sequel, but I think that would be really cool, actually, if there was Poke-a-Floats 2. There was a very convincing leak that leaked Poke-a-Floats 2. I was really excited, and then subsequently very disappointed.
We talking Smash 4? There was a Poke-a-Floats 2 leak?
No, for Ultimate.
Oh, well, I mean, it could still be announced. We'll fingers crossed. If I'm gonna be honest though, perhaps my age is showing a bit, but I wouldn't recognize like half the Pokemon these days anyway. Maybe I wouldn't even enjoy Poke-a-Floats 2.
Yeah, you're just really old, man.
But this week, we're not talking about Poke-a-Floats 2 or 1. We're talking about tech. We're talking about, why is learning tech so important? At what point can it become a problem? And, some other, what else, AV?
Yeah, so we're kind of jumping in after our inaugural episode. We wanted to hit something that was fairly relatable to most people. So we wanted to go with tech and practice techniques around tech. And why do we learn tech? Is there a point where we're focusing too much on it? Like you said, yeah, when does it become detrimental? When are you spending too much time focusing on it? And how do you push that into the competitive side of things? How do you implement a technique that you've practiced for a lot of time in friendlies or by yourself, and then start being able to execute it in tournament?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, AV, I'm really looking forward to jumping in and talking about that. But I think it's worth mentioning. This is our first show post-launch. This is our first show we've ever released where someone has listened to one of our previous shows. We're still in that early chapter of this podcast's life, right? We're still in the dawn. We're still very new, but we're so humbled by all the early support that we've gotten so far, and we really appreciate just how welcoming and how open everybody that has listened has been. People have been very sweet to us, and we really appreciate it.
Definitely. I think the reception is pretty good, and I'm really excited for the future.
But in just 1 second, tech. Welcome back to Beyond the Metagame. This week, we're talking about tech. And, Abby, I want to just jump right into this. Why do you think that, tech skill and is such an important thing to focus on when you're alone, right? When you don't have another homie to play with. Why is it such a good thing to pursue?
Well, it's a really good question. I think the first thing to do would be to find a really good analog for it. My go-to analog would likely be sports. What do you do when you don't have a team to practice with, or you don't have your coach, or you don't have an environment that is basically letting you practice things that aren't local to yourself? You basically figure out drills, and you figure out things you can do on your own. And you improve your game, and you improve parts of your game that you can do by yourself. And you do that because you can focus on things that coaches can help you out with, or that other people can help you out with when you are with them. So it's a matter of optimizing your time. Learning tech is really important because there's a lot of things that you can learn that don't involve another person being there. One of the examples would be, something as simple, at least for Smash 4, would be like ledge trumping. ledge trumping isn't an incredibly hard thing to do, nor is it inherently frame precise, but it does require you to build some kind of muscle memory, and it does require you to spend some time grinding it out. So the thing is, it is a very useful thing to do in competitive environments. So why aren't people consistent with it? Why do we see that people either mess it up in tournament, or they don't go for it, or they're not confident in this? I think that it's interesting because we have this thing that is actually very simple to do, and you can learn it by yourself. But why aren't people able to practice it well?
Yeah, I really love the analogy you made, connecting it to sports. It's almost like, let's say in basketball, right? Um, you really want to hit like that Tim Duncan 15-foot bank shot, and then I'm playing a pickup game with you, and you're missing all these shots because you're like, oh, sorry, Dane, I'm just working on this specific shot today. I'm like, screw you, bro, put the ball in the hoop. I I don't want to
Yeah,
just go do this by yourself when I'm not with you. I want to watch you miss these shots. And it's the same kind of thing. Like you'll play friendlies with somebody in Smash, and they'll be like, yo, like, let me ledge trump you real quick. Or like they're like, yo, I'm
yeah,
like, dude, what? No, go ledge trump a bot. Like, look, I don't want to watch you do drills. And
exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I think there is a phenomenon. There are certain movements. Yeah, in Smash 4, big one is the ledge trump, where a lot of lower to mid-level players simply cannot execute it. If you put a gun to their head and say, "Hey, ledge trump," or you're dead. I mean, that kind of got dark, but but you get the point.
Yeah, yeah.
There's going to be like half the community is getting wiped out, and I think that's it's weird, right? Because I think it's weird to be so invested in the game and to not be able to pull off a difficult but not impossible technique at will. Abi, why do you think? I mean, what's your theory? Why can't so many Smash players perform these techniques?
There's a lot of different ways I could approach this. I'll go with some of the easy ones. One of the things is that it's not fun, right? When you think about things that are improved by rote practice or by simply just grinding at something over and over again, we think about stuff like learning an instrument, learning the basics of an instrument, or think about doing math. A lot of these things aren't inherently very interesting. They just require doing the same thing over and over again until it just becomes either muscle memory or like just normal memory. So there is this idea that it's not very interesting to kind of sit at your monitor and practice ledge trumping 50 times in a row. That is understandable. You're there for a lot of people. This is something that they do as a social activity. This is something that they aren't necessarily looking to be the absolute best at. So maybe for them, the social optimum or the maximum enjoyment they can get out of the game is not necessarily sitting at the monitor and practicing this movement 50 times in a row, or even 100 or 1,000. However, there are people who are very competitive about the game and that want to learn it, but simply won't put in the time because they aren't well, they basically don't have the patience and they don't have the dedication to just kind of grind it out. It's something that you can't really think about. You just have to just develop the muscle memory. And there's a lot of discipline. That's kind of the word I was looking for. Discipline is the most important thing in practice. Now, that's kind of one way to look at it. I think the other way to look at it, other than discipline, is the fact that a lot of people are actually just spending time playing friendlies, actually, instead of, and they use that as their practice time. And they don't kind of see that it's like, why do I have to play the game more than just playing with other people? Isn't this a 1v1 game? And that's not necessarily the case. As we've seen, there's a lot of things that you only get better at and you optimize your time better with other people. But yeah, there's these things that you don't get better at unless you're doing it over and over again by yourself. And I did really like your point about, it's like, yeah, why are you practicing this one really specific shot in the game when we just want you to be like hitting your layups? We want you to be hitting your bread and butters because we just want you to put points to the board.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting. I think that you made a good point. A lot of people, when they set aside time to play Smash, they optimize it in the sense that they usually will invite a friend over, or the only time in their week they'll have to play Smash, or at least they set aside, is when they go to a tournament, or maybe that friendly club meeting in their local community. Where they play friendlies, and their Smash time is allocated as also a social time, right? But it's almost I would really um, invite you guys to make the investment, right? If you set aside the time to do the dirty work, to, you will enjoy down the road these other times that you've previously allocated for social time. I mean, winning's fun. That's just true. If you're entering tournaments, especially, you're gonna have more fun the farther you go in bracket. And sure, it's not glamorous to practice ledge trumping for an hour while listening to music, or maybe beyond the metagame. But that one time you're in tournament and you get that ledge trump back here that seals out the game, it'll be worth every single second of it. And to transition a little bit, Abby, I also want you to think about this. You did mention that ledge trump back here, people just don't want to grind it, largely in part due to the fact that it's just not fun. It's just not fun to learn. But at the same time, I feel like people will practice other weird techs. Like there's a whole bunch of perfect pivot gods out there who perfect pivot their way to getting two stocked. And I'm trying to think of some other examples, or just they have a really polished combo game or something like that. Do you think that that kind of movement is just more fun? I feel like people never only know how to ledge trump if that is their only advanced technique. You know what I mean? Or let's say instant ledge dash. I think is kind of a good melee equivalent, where it's very difficult and not super rewarding unless you're at the top of the level. Unless you're playing at a high level. So yeah, why do you think some people will practice some stuff but not other stuff?
So here's the thing. I have a little bit of a working theory on this. I think that it's a lot easier to be recognized for something really flashy, and it's a lot easier for people to basically see this I don't know what I want to call it, visceral combo. It's like you see someone do a really optimized footstool lock combo with Greninja, but then you see that they can't even play a proper condition grab 50-50 game. But then you see this really cool combo and you see them do this, pull off these really optimized things, and you're impressed. You can be very directly impressed, and you can make a name for yourself doing really fancy things, even if you're not that good of a player inherently. I think it's a lot about being noticed. It's a lot about wanting people to view you as this crazy technical player. But it actually does hurt you in the sense that if you're spending all of this time working on something that's really niche and working on a punish that you would only actually use 5 to 10% of the time, you are seriously taking away from the meat of the game, which is 70 to 80% neutral and spacing and understanding the space between players, understanding matchups, and a lot of the things that go into actually playing the game. I think that the best way to improve is to practice all of the really, really simple stuff. You shouldn't be missing stuff like a pivot grab. It may sound simple to people that are really into the competitive scene. I play DK, so obviously I need to know how to pivot grab, because if I miss even a single pivot grab, that misses me a kill confirm, it's over.
That could be the set.
Exactly. I have to take every single opportunity and maximize all of these opportunities based off of really simple stuff. Because I'm not going to be looking for this for my sick like lock setups, or for my sick like down B cancel off the platform setups. I can do them, but I'm never going to be looking for them. I'm
Especially when it's like
looking
last stock, last hit of an important set, right?
exactly right. It's like there's very little, the risk reward ratio just doesn't make any sense. So you'll see these people that want to get recognition in different ways, and that's fine. It's just that when they look back and they say, why am I not improving, or why am I not like developing as a player in other aspects, they kind of have their like themselves to blame on that part.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think in summary, right? If you're looking for like a one night stand, perfect pivot, all you need to, right? And I want you to do the freakiest footstool combo you could drop, right? But if you want that long term relationship, that like 15-year beautiful marriage, 3 children, a white picket fence house, you got to be ledge trumping.
Yeah, no, I mean, not like I actually really think that a lot of these people should actually be recognized, like people who practice like really optimized footstool combos. I actually think it's really cool to have things like combo contests. I like recognizing people for their accomplishments and for the cool things that they can do. It's just that when they try to apply some of these things to their actual game, it's just a lot of the time it's very difficult.
Sure thing. Well, I think that we've introduced the topic pretty well, and I want to move on to how you think people should practice tech. Right? What do you think is more worth your time when you're in the lab and you're saying, "Hey, I'm going to practice some tech." Are you valuing matchup specific tech, like how to combo this character at this percent in this situation? Is that the most important thing to you, or are you all about like that just general movement? Let's say you're playing Cloud, being able to hit those low spaced back airs against a Kirby, or maybe against if you're a melee Fox, hitting those drill shines consistently. Those just kind of bread and butter general jack of all trade movements. How do you know when to value what?
So this is a bit of a loaded question because it really depends on how much time you have to dedicate to the game. I think there's a few tiers of, and I might not explain them well, but I want the viewers and maybe you, if you don't already think this way, to kind of understand that there's like 3 tiers of people. Like some people who have very little time to dedicate to the game, especially by themselves. One tier who basically has like a decent amount of time to both dedicate to the game by themselves and with other people. And then there's people who are able to kind of spend as much time as they want doing either one of these things. Basically the second group is people who are actually going to have to make that trade-off between playing other people and playing by yourself. The first group is actually rarely going to spend time practicing by themselves, and that's totally okay. Because if you don't have a lot of time, it's definitely more efficient to practice with other people rather than to just practice things by yourself. Obviously, there's some corner cases, but that's just a general statement I'm going to say. So I'm going to focus on group 2 and say that there are honestly very basic things that you should be practicing by yourself. If I'm playing Cloud, so I have played a decent amount of Cloud, I'm not going to be going to a bot and I'm not going to be spamming back air against a Kirby. I think that is actually something that I can practice with someone else. What I will be doing, however, is I will be practicing my perfect pivots because Cloud is one of those characters who has a really good perfect pivot, especially when he has limit. So I will be practicing some of the basic things that I want to get comfortable with. I think that it could be valuable to practice maybe the perfect frame canceled forward air, frame canceled back air, though against a sandbag or against another character. And I actually do want to hear your input on this too, because I know you're someone who's really into practicing by yourself. So I do want to hear your thoughts on this as well. But to kind of finish up, when I go into practice, I'm literally only practicing the basics. I'm practicing ledge trumping. I'm practicing perfect pivots. I'm practicing stuff that I could never really do. It's like when I'm playing someone else, yeah, I'm not going to be. It's like sometimes I'll try to pull off like I'll try to implement my perfect pivot somewhere, or I'll try to do something like with the stuff that I've practiced, but I'm never going to be like spamming perfect pivot or using it as a training room practice environment. So just really simple stuff that I literally just cannot do with anyone else. I think that's kind of the optimal way to do it. I think for people that do have a little more time, it's really useful, and it's probably very useful to practice stuff like, yeah, hit like, can I get the perfect back airs? Can I have the like perfect spacing against different characters? And like, can I make sure that my sword is at the optimal distance from my enemy at all times? So yeah, can you actually go into to like what your practice routine is like, and especially as a cloud player, and I want to hear your thoughts on what is your ideal practice session by yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think, and that one of the most underrated things is just to practice your own character's movement. I think that a huge bane of the mid-level, lower level player experience is you have the read, you have the moment to punish, but you just mess up. You fast. Like, let's say we'll stay with the cloud example. You know, a fox air dodges in front of you. You have a free back air, but you like cancel the back air into the ground, and then the fox can punish you. I see stuff like that in my local scene all the time when I'm watching, looking over someone's shoulder and I see a game's about to, I'm like, oh wow, they're about to win. Oh no, they just dropped a punish, and it's usually because of like flubbing a dash or not auto canceling something. Very simple kind of technical errors that we take for granted. I think it's really important to always be cognizant of that and to keep working on that. I mean, this weekend at SCR 2018. I was up game 3 against Seoul. It was last stock, last hit, Cloud versus Little Mac. Seoul side B's onto the stage in front of me, and I can't. And he was at like 120. I cancel the killing back air. I cancel it into the ground, and then get up smashed. And I'm a veteran of the game. No, feel free to no.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show. I mean, I'm someone that takes this stuff very seriously, and even I'm susceptible as someone who advocates for this. Even I still mess up. I'm not perfect either, but I think it's really important to do that. That's the most important thing. But I will also say that matchup specific training, like what combos work when, is really good, especially if you're the kind of player in your scene who A, has a bracket demon who plays a specific character, or B, you're so good at relative to your region that you usually will only lose to a couple of people. And I would implore you to really know so intuitively when your stuff works against who. I don't think that you can ever finish that task. I think it's always awesome to refresh your combo game against certain characters, or slowing down the frames like our guest J Tails was talking about last week, and watching in training mode, watch their ledge get up animations and really just master the other characters. I think that's important too.
Yeah. Can I just jump in to kind of ask you about two specific things on these topics?
Sure.
I want to ask you, you brought up the fact that knowing how your character moves and understanding your character's movement is one of the most important things. I want you to describe how you have practiced your character's movement and only focused on movement by yourself in training mode. And I want you to kind of help describe how that experience was. Additionally,
let me answer that one first.
Sure. Go for it. Yeah.
So my end game, and where all of our end games should be, is in my opinion, is complete. Like, what's the word? Obvious synchronicity. When I want you to become your character, I want there to be no disconnect between you and the guy on screen. Right? You should never, ever, ever think about an input, or ever be cognizant of the controller that you're holding. I want there to be a complete resonance between your character and yourself. That's always my end goal. So how do I go about doing that? Well, I practice every single practical movement that I can. So what does that mean? Um, Pivot pivot attacking, pivot pivot grabbing, you know, pivot grabbing, foxtrotting, dash dancing, every single kind of movement that I want to implement in my play, or already do implement in my play, I make sure I will never flub it, right? So as Cloud, some good stuff is like raw back air, ledge trump up air, ledge trump back air. All these kind of somewhat technical inputs, I'm a master of, or at least I am. That's my pursuit, right? So it really comes down to identifying what the most difficult, simultaneously difficult and important movements that your character needs to utilize, and drilling them and drilling them and drilling them. So if you're a Cloud player, for instance, who cannot let trump back air consistently, or let trump up air, pause this podcast and go do that until you can do it 10 times in a row. And I come from a basketball background, sports background in general, so I do drills. I'll pivot across the stage, I'll ledge trump, I'll do an instant buffered attack back on the stage, and I'll pivot all the way across the stage again, and I'll do that until I do it correctly a couple times in a row. And I really just set drills for myself, and it's not glamorous. I just do them repeatedly until I don't mess up, and then I just go get a snack.
Yep, I think we were talking about this like instant gratification that players want, and I think it's just very difficult for people to internalize this idea of setting like drills for yourself and setting these military disciplined tasks. How would you suggest that someone who is very self-aware of themselves as not liking these really routine and rote tasks, how would you recommend someone like that take what you said and implement it on their own time?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would advise you to do it the same way that you manage to go to school or go to work or take medicine when you're sick. What it is a necessary evil. If you do so wish to improve or to be a good Smash player in general, this is a part of what it takes. If you want to have success in tournaments, if you want to beat up your friends, this is a concrete way to help yourself get there. So it's like, if you want to be a doctor, you're going to go to med school. You might complain about it sometimes. You might sleep through your alarm clock once or twice a quarter. Hopefully not more than that. But you do it because it's a necessary evil. So there's a great philosophy concerning, what's the word? When you delay something? Procrastinate. There's a philosophy about procrastination, right? Procrastination is only manifested when you don't have any obligations. So, if you're in the middle of Africa, right, and you're stranded, you're in the Sahara Desert, you're not going to procrastinate finding your water source, or procrastinate foraging for berries. I mean, you're hungry. You just do it because you want to live.
Right.
And that's how you have to contextualize the means to accomplish your goal. Be the Saharan berry collector. Look, I want to win. This is what I have to do to win. Don't even, and if you don't have the mental toughness to do that, then you don't want to improve.
I think that for the kind of player that has that mentality, wouldn't you think that would come naturally to them, and that they would be in this metaphorical Sahara Desert and they would be fighting it out? However, I am pushing you a little on this because I think it's also really important to understand that there's people who need easy ways to kind of come into this practice. And yes, there is no, in reality, there is no easy way to really good routine and discipline. I don't think it's always good to frame it as a necessary evil, but I do agree that that is absolutely what it is for a lot of people. So I do agree with that framework in terms of the way that you described it. I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I think a lot of what we're trying to focus on here is like, how do we take something for someone? And so I think you did a really good job of saying you just have to do it. And I like that. I like that answer because there is no if and or but. You have to put in the time, and that's how you get results. So does that mean that the answer for someone that doesn't want to put in the time is and doesn't find it fun at all, is the answer just like you're just not gonna win?
I have a good answer for this. I think it's more relatable to put this problem into terms, right? The problem that we're addressing is, yeah, you know the solution. You know the solution. If you want to learn how to ledge trump back air because you want to win more sets, you know the solution is go practice ledge trump back air. So why don't you do it? It's the same. It's the same exact thing as when people are overweight and they know if I eat less calories than I burn, I'll lose weight. So why don't you just do it? You know, because it's hard. Because people are human. Because instant gratification is more appealing than long-term solution to the human brain. I mean, like we've mentioned so many times already in this podcast, and that's a great point, Abby. You're right. So I suppose the way that we should recontextualize it is saying, how do we convince people how do we enable people to have fun doing this? Is there a way for people to have fun grinding out a boring tech skill?
I don't know. I think there are ways to make it more fun. I think what you said, like putting your favorite music on in the background, I think something that's actually really cool that combines two things. I'm not a huge fan of multitasking, but I am a fan of faking it till you make it. Here are two things that are really important to me. One is analyzing matches and watching matches of my favorite Donkey Kong players. I am a Donkey Kong main. So I will watch DK Wolf for Tech. I'll watch Hikaru's neutral. I'll watch Hikaru's punish game. I'll watch like a bunch like Konga. I'll tweak. I will absolutely study their VODs. Also, I will practice my perfect pivot down tilts. I'll practice my perfect delayed DKOs. I'll practice my all of the different variations of combos. Sometimes my jab block setups, stuff like that. My jab one to turn around up tilt. I will make sure that's all down. And sometimes I'll just do that while having some of the VODs playing in the background.
Ooh.
Now, yeah, I actually think this is a huge thing, especially because like it's just fun to watch the game. We all love watching the game, especially if we're really entrenched in the competitive community. We love watching the game. So kind of just basically doing this like very mechanical thing in your hand and just watching like and absorbing some of the things that you see in the game is sometimes a really good way to get into the habit of practicing these things on your own. That's what I like to do personally, but I will absolutely just kind of emphasize the fact that you need to be putting aside, if you really want to get better, you need to be putting aside time to only study the game. I think that's something definitely for another time. We can probably do an entire episode on studying the game. And I think I do want to get into that later, but at the beginning, I think, yeah, doing these like multitasking things to ease you into it is probably something that I'd recommend.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit, Abby. I know that you and I, we touched on it a little bit earlier. The whole concept that there's these certain tech fiends, right? There's these certain people. I like to call it the Weed Lord effect. Weed Lord. If you've never heard of the infamous Weed Lord, if you just watch, he's a melee falcon, and if you just watch Weed Lord just like beat up a bot, you're like, how does this guy ever lose a game? But then you'll see him in tournament, and he's a very skilled player, but relative to how good he moves and how sick he is, he's terrible. Like, you'll just see him get four stocked, but it's like the most impressive getting four stocked you've ever seen. On the contrary, you have the legendary Borp. If you haven't seen the Borp video, look it up. It's great. It's this compilation of this Sheik player from the Midwest, again melee player, very very good Sheik in his region, but the dude, he doesn't know any sort of advanced tech, and he plays the most slow, methodical, like approach to the game you could possibly have, and it's hilarious. And they're really kind of a positive and a negative. They're two opposites that show there is this spectrum, right, of tech ability, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with success. So, Abi, when do you know that you're a weed lord? When and at what point on the spectrum, so between no tech skill and being a tech god, where on that spectrum should you try to aim to land at?
I'm gonna give the boring answer and say you should. I would much rather you be a Borp than a Weed Lord. I I think that most players who just simply practice their bread and butters and practice their neutral game will absolutely be better at the game than someone who has completely optimized their punish game. Like
Hmm.
I've said before, 70% of the game is neutral. 70% of the game is going to be you getting stray hits and you winning neutral interactions.
But certainly that can't be
Yeah.
true, right? I mean, like think about like okay, if you win neutral with Zero Suit Samus's jab over and over again, I mean, you're not going to win a set or Little Max jab, whatever. At what point? I mean, I think I'd rather be a weed lord. I
Really?
mean, yeah, because it's like, well, here's the question. It's like one of those like the chicken or the egg situations, I guess. But it's like, would you rather get nothing off of winning neutral, or never win neutral, but when you do, you get the stock? I don't know.
I
I,
actually think there's a false dichotomy here. I think that Borp is not a player who doesn't close out stocks.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's the difference
Yeah,
because
yeah, sure. So we're saying, well, we're exaggerating, of course, right? I mean,
right.
Weed Lord has a neutral, and Borp has a punish game, but they're just the if you had to identify a weak point in their game, that would be it, right?
Right. I mean, it's just very clear. I'll tell you my personal experience with this. I was a Sheik main. I played a very simple Sheik. I did not do this isn't Smash 4 by the way for context. I did not do perfect pivot combos. I did needles to bouncing fish. I did a lot of the things that were useful to kill. I just knew all of my bread and butters. I did pretty well. Now I switched to DK. Now for the very first 2 weeks, I did not do anything else other than get stray hits and ding dong the entire time. And basically, ding dong for people who don't know is the up air DK combo. Most people know it.
The kill confirm.
Yeah, it has a
It
very funny
scales
name.
ridiculously off rage.
Yeah, I think here's the thing about it. It's really consistent across nearly the entire cast. It is arguably the best kill confirm in the game. I will call it that because I don't see any other character with, and obviously I may be missing something, but I don't see any other character with such a consistent kill confirm that is pulled off on the competitive, mid, and low levels that much.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
yeah, and here's the thing about it. I wanted to break the game. I wanted to break the game down to something as simple as humanly possible. I don't have a lot of time to practice this game, so I literally practiced the ding dong or DKO, as DK mains like to call it. I just practiced it over and over again. I went to my first tournament. Now I already knew fundamentals and I already kind of knew the game. But then I went to my first tournament and I won. I won basically only ding donging the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the really funny part, which is why I will stick by my statement that I would much rather you have pulling. Like it was not a beautiful victory. It was not. People were mad at me. It was not a fun time afterward. It was. I think the person that I beat in grand finals, I basically used the kill confirm at the top of the Dreamland platform. I killed him at like 40 or 37 or something silly. And there was not much happiness, but I won with basically that kill confirm and some basic neutral skills. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, surely I would suggest that the less tech that you have to pull off in stressful environments, the better. Surely you want to have your tech down so much that you have complete continuity with yourself and your character, like I was getting at earlier. But under stress, when you're at a major, when you're on a stream in front of people, when there's people cheering for you and there's a lot on the line, you're in losers bracket. Sometimes, I mean, inarguably, the text is not going to be the same. And that's why it's really, really important to have your bread and butters down. And Abi, you're humble, but your basic fundamental tech skill, your pivot grabs, your double back airs as Donkey Kong, all of your kill confirms, you're extremely consistent. Which leads me to kind of my thesis to wrap this entire this portion of the conversation up. At least from my perspective, I think I've come to my conclusion that tech skill is very important. It is extremely important up until the point where you get your bread and butter, old reliable things almost 100% down. That's your auto canceled back air as Cloud, or your drill shine as Melee Fox, or your pivot grab as Donkey Kong. Once you get those bread and butter, all jack of all trade options 100% down, to the point where you can always depend on something, and it isn't a weakness in your play, your tech's fine. At that point, you have good enough tech to do anything, in my opinion. From there, any additional tech skill is gonna help tremendously. But you're right. Beyond that, you need to learn how to play neutral, how to get out of disadvantage state, how to recover, how to pressure advantage state. I think that there's just a high ceiling, or a high floor. Once you get past that, it isn't as big of an issue.
I definitely agree. You can't be playing the solo from 1 by Metallica if you can't play a C major scale. Like like it's cool, it's impressive, but you have to have your fundamentals down, because those are the building blocks to everything else. I'm absolutely on board with your thesis. I think tech is a really important thing to build on. I don't want to say that it is not important. I just want to emphasize that if you had to pick up one and go to a tournament the next day, I would absolutely go with like the really simple things and the boring things.
So let's talk combos, or difficult tech in general. I'm curious as to what you think about, at what point is a combo or a setup too difficult to realistically go for in bracket. So an example I instantly think of is the Geo combo with Diddy. That's where you get the down throw to footstool, like dare jab lock, and then you do like the nair footstool, and you have to follow the DI. And it's really complicated, and it's a really hard combo to pull off with like okay reward, but it's optimal, right? But most Diddy Kongs won't go for it. They'll go for up throw aerial, down throw aerials, because it's more consistent. So at what point as a player do you decide, hey, I'm gonna go for what I know I'll get, or should I spend all this time to make sure I know I will get the really, really hard stuff?
That is a really difficult question. It is again about how are you breaking down your time. I hate to always bring it back to this, but it's true. Like if you don't have like it's time is the most valuable resource on this planet. That is something that I have come to realize, and that that I think a lot of people would agree with when they realize that is the only thing you're limited by. You can spend all of your time learning the Geo combo, but again, you're likely never going to be able to close out a stock knowing the Geo combo. I think understanding that if you have a ton of time and you have optimized your character to a ridiculous level, then it makes sense. If you have everything down perfectly, then it makes sense to go into training mode and say, hey, I have reached the top of so many parts of my character, and it's like this is like on my level now. This is something that I can properly add to my kit without dropping anything else out. It's a lot like practicing any technique with an instrument or any technique in sports. You have to build on the fundamentals and the building blocks that you have. Because a lot of the time, even in these crazy combos, there's micro skills that are imported from things that you've practiced over the course of learning this game. Even something as simple as following DI, like you said, following DI in a combo is something that you learn in another context. It's something that you learn when you're looking at simple throw combos. There's a lot of things that when you break it down, when you break these really complicated like combos down, there's a lot of things that you have to practice in other contexts. And then if you can get all of those pieces, if you can get the footstool down, you're consistent at footstooling. If you can get the down air jab lock down, if you can get the the timing for reading DI or the timing for the nair, understanding how to fast fall the nair. Once you put all of these, once you have all of these things individually, putting them together actually becomes really natural, which is why I think it's a beautiful thing that once you've understood all of these things separately, they all come together really, really nicely.
Yeah, sure, sure. I mean, I think you said it well there. Um, I think it really comes down to like the fact that I would rather fight against Diddy Kong that would go for the Geo combo at 0%, uh, than the Diddy Kong that like precisely knows every single down tilt confirm and can execute it 100% of the time. Like it's kind of like the Jet Li or what's the Jet Li? No, Bruce Lee quote. I think like I'd rather fight uh like I wouldn't be afraid of someone that's practiced 10,000 kicks
Yeah,
once. I'd rather
right.
I'd be terrified of the guy that's practiced one kick 10,000 times. That's the kind of thing. I mean, I'm terrified when people don't ever drop their bread and butters. Um, that's when I'm like, okay, this is the real deal. When I fought against Zenyu at Genesis 5, and every time I got grabbed, I knew I was taking a certain amount of percent. He'd follow my DI. He would optimize every single you know every single one of the basic combos he had mastered. That was really terrifying. Um, so yeah, I think what you said is true there, man. I think you have to have the basics super down, and then at that point, then you can put some ranch dressing on top, but you need a salad underneath.
Right. Definitely.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you'll see that a lot of these players like Void and Zenu, players who have very strong neutral, punish, advantage, disadvantage, and very strong understanding of the game mentally and with the neural connections with their hands and their mind. These people, you'll see them going for the really optimal stuff anyway. You'll see them both do the bread and butters, and you'll see them do the really optimal footstool or jab lock combos. And that's the really cool thing. You do see this progression. I think in the low level, you'll see a lot of mixed bag, where you'll see half the people going for really fancy stuff, half the people like struggling initially to learn their character. And then the mid level, the people who perform really well are the people who know their bread and butters. And that's why I think you're right. Like I'm a lot more scared of someone who goes for the bread and butters than someone who goes for really fancy tech, because we play at the mid upper mid level where we know that they don't have a lot of other things down. But if I go to a big tournament, if I go to a major and I go up against a very notable player, I'm actually going to be scared of their really optimized combo.
Yeah, true.
That's when I'm like, okay, if I get hit by this optimized combo, if I get hit by this like Void has probably practiced the footstool like back air lock on DK on Final Destination. So if I get hit by this thing, I'm probably taking like 50-60% right off the bat.
Right. Yeah, sure. Sure. And I mean, I guess to piggyback off that, when or I guess how do you prepare for that transition. You know, how do you decide? Okay, I'm gonna bring this super hard technique into a tournament. You know, maybe we're talking about the guy who had been practicing his ledge trumps finally, or his a really good example is the instant, the ledge dash in Melee, where it's in ledge dash, for instance, is all or nothing, right? If you mess it up, you SD, and if you do it correctly, you get a reward. You get intangibility at the ledge, but not by that. It's not like a crazy reward. So you're risking a lot to gain an amount. How do you transition to that phase where you decide, okay, look, I've been practicing this really dangerous technique. I'm gonna go for it. How do you make that decision?
I will use one of my personal experiences, and then I'd like you to talk about it because I think you've been a really good example of this as well. I used to SD with Sheik a lot in tournament. If you don't know, Sheik's side B, the grenade, puts you into special fall, meaning if you use it off the stage, you will die. I used
The way you said that was so foreboding. If you use it off the stage, you will die.
It's true. I mean, unless you can get back to the ledge, but it was foreboding. It was it was awful. It was a terribly designed move. It was not a fun move to have in my kit. I'd much rather prefer that my side B did nothing most of the time. Because the thing is, if you can only use Bouncing Fish, Sheik's down B move, once. So if you forget that you've used it in the air and then you try to press down B, it'll come out as side B and you will SD. But here's another thing. There's something called, basically for most of the people who are in competitive, something called a B reverse that reverses your momentum when you use a special move. You can B reverse Sheik's down B. Now, when a character like Pikachu throws you off the stage, you get thrown off with your back facing the stage. Now, what this means is that if you try to use Bouncing Fish to get back to stage, you will fly into the blast zone. So in order to recover, and in order to use Bouncing Fish in this scenario, you have to B reverse your down B. Now, what this means is that it can very, very easily come out as a side B input. I would be frightened to do this because it's not a very difficult thing. You just have to hold the control stick down, press B, and then rotate it to the side. You just have to make sure that it's facing like straight down initially, because if it's even a little off, you're getting a side B.
I'm getting stressed just thinking about this.
Yeah, it is really stressful. There was a tournament where in all of my losses, I think 4 out of 8 of my deaths were SDs from Sheik's side B. Now, I'm going to transition to this and say, how do we feel confident going for this stuff in tournament? I think there's 2 parts to it. One part is constantly doing in friendlies. There's obviously a point where you don't want to be you don't want to be, like we talked about, wasting someone's time practicing this technique that all you're doing is you're just dying over and over again and your opponent isn't actually getting any practice time. But you should be going for it a few times in friendlies. If you're not going for it in your friendly environment, you're sure as hell not going to be pulling it off in competitive. So that is one thing. And the other thing is you just have to go for it in tournament. If you're not implementing your tech in tournament, it's never going to feel right. You just got to jump in. It's like when you're a little unsure of how the water is in the pool. You just have to jump in. If you mess up, you just have to say, I was not good enough. I messed up on something that I can absolutely practice on my own. But I did it. I went for it, and I know what I need to focus on now.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great point. I think it's the whole concept of steel is forged under fire. The best, most refined things become refined through trial and error, and you have to make errors. And I like what you said. Practice it in low pressure environments until you feel comfortable enough to use it in high pressure environments. You're still gonna mess it up. I mean, top Melee players still whiff their ledge dashes. High level Smash 4 players still mess up their trumps and fast fall off stage. But you're never going to get there without getting burnt. You know what I mean? It's gonna
Yeah,
happen.
definitely. Yeah, I think you are gonna get burned. I've been burned over and over again, and I think I think I'll call it that I'm lucky that I have this mindset that allows me to just say, all right, I messed up, next one. I think it would be ideal for everyone to have that mindset, but it's unrealistic. I think I'd like people to move in that direction, but it will burn you a little. You will feel scared the next time you go for it, but you just got to practice it. You just got to put in the time. And then when the time comes, you know that you're either playing to win or you're playing not to lose. And if you're playing not to lose and you're not going for the stuff that you need to go for, you are going to lose because you're going to start thinking about losing, and that's when you know it's already over. Now, after that, I want to get your perspective on this. You're someone who goes for really crazy things. I've seen you go for the 20%. Like Cloud has a kill confirm where you can kill, so like with max rage, you can kill any character at like 20%. No one really goes for it. I saw you hit it in tournament like, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? And that was really impressive because you just went for something that was a purely optimized thing. You just pulled the trigger. You go for stuff all off stage all the time. You are someone who has embodied the idea of bringing your A game and your optimal punishes to the table. I want you to walk me through how you have how you have implemented these things into your play.
Yeah, dude. I think that's just I. Okay, here's the thing, man. Here's the thing. I think it's way lamer to lose without throwing a punch. You know, I think that you know it's very. I very much adopted this kind of mindset through the likes of the Korean DJs, the Mewtwo Kings, those who have came before me, who have implemented the style of if it's optimal and difficult, keep going for it until it's optimal and just part of the game. Um, if I see an opportunity to go for something, and it, if I hit it, I win. Or if I know I'm supposed to, if I was a perfect player, I just try to do it. I'm not saying I have balls of steel. I mean, sometimes I mess up, or sometimes I'll be too scared. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just kind of decided at one point in my head that I used to be a Falcon main, so maybe it's just in my blood. That you have to just go for stuff. If you lose and you didn't go for it, then you'll be sweating at night. It's like that meme where the guy is like turning away from his girlfriend. The girlfriend's like, "Oh, he's thinking about other girls," but really, it's just it'll just be you. Like, man, I should have gone for the dare. I should have gone for the spike off stage. Man, I suck. I never want to have that feeling. So if I die because I made an aggressive error, well, I suck. I need to go back into the lab, but at least I had the heart. So that's kind of what I go for. And I don't know if it's worth it in general, but for at least my play style, I think I like to do that.
I'll kind of help you out there and say that it has. I've seen it definitely be worth it. Obviously, I've seen times where you've been severely punished for it and have lost games or sets for stuff like that. But on average, I think like because you've started going for it in the competitive environment, emphasis on that, and you haven't let it affect your mentality about it. It's just become like second nature for you. I think a really good example would be going for the cloud, basically the cloud up B drag down kamikaze. I think that's something that should be very standard. If you're up a stock as cloud and you catch someone with the first hit of your up B off stage, you're hitting the second one and you're dragging them down with you. Like that should be ingrained in every cloud player's head. However, there is an inherent fear about it. But you always go for it. You are always hitting that button. You're always pulling the trigger. And I'll see players not pull the trigger, and I'll see cloud players miss out on a very simple way to guarantee to kill your opponent every time. I think there's like maybe one character that can. I think is it like villagers sometimes can get out of it or something like that.
A lot of well, there's a lot of times where it won't work if people. It depends what
Right.
hitbox. There's certain times where you don't go for it, but yeah,
Right.
but the general point of what you're saying is true, that there are plenty of times to see clouds. They have it where it is a confirmed death, but they're so
Yeah.
conditioned to not even think about going for that
Yeah.
they won't pull the trigger when they need to. And yeah, sure. I think your point still stands.
Right. I wasn't really talking about like, yeah, there of course there's a back hitbox that sends you at a weird angle, and like, yeah, there's a lot of, it's like, but when you usually know when it's going to send you at the send them at the right angle.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that's it's really cool to see that. Okay, you've just gone for it in tournament, and now because you've done it so many times in tournament, it's just like if you see it, you just hit the button.
Yeah,
Right.
I've got the point. There's other people out there that really also kind of. I mean, look at Fatality, look at Elegant, look at like Wadi. There's a lot of players out there that really embody the same thing. You know, if they can kill you off of one hit, they're gonna try, and if they die for it, they die for it. But if it was a high percentage play and they're trusting themselves to make it crazy, to execute, and if they fail, then at least it's their fingers' fault. It isn't their head's fault. And I think it's always easier to forgive your fingers than to forgive your head. I think it's easier to deal with mentally.
Definitely. I think we've done a really good job of capturing this topic. I think it's time to pivot, or maybe perfect pivot.
Ooh.
Oh wait,
dude, yes.
yeah.
Someone get a drum kit. I want to wow, I kind of do that. I kind of make that noise with my lips. Okay, sorry, but what were you saying?
It's time to pivot over to a section that we were talking about before, which is what is the questions, or what are the questions that we've received from people on our Twitter and on social media.
Yeah, so like we said earlier, this is our first week making an episode in the wild. We have we have Twitter followers coming in. We're starting off with a big surge, and we had some activity. Mr. Diamond Don fan out from the Central Coast, the Luigi extraordinaire, Mr. Matan, a good friend of ours, both. He wanted to ask a question I found very interesting, and I'll just go ahead and read his tweet directly. Top players often adapt mid-set. Like, I'll take game 1 convincingly. Game 2 will be pretty even, but they clutch it out. In game 3, I get bopped. Any tips or tricks to what to look out for / avoid in these scenarios? And I really like this question a lot. And I think it is one that a lot of people deal with. You'll hear like a lot of people say, oh, my round 2 winners, I was up against this good player. I took game 1 and it was close, but he was a little bit better than me. Or like I threw or I blew it, and that's a pretty common phenomenon. I'll let you take a crack at it first.
Sure. I got two things that I'm thinking about. One thing is the simple surface level thing about players that are better are going to notice habits faster. You have, like we've talked about in this episode, players that are good don't have to think about their bread and butters. They're thinking about the game. It's like when you're playing the piano. Good piano players are not looking at their fingers. Good typists on keyboards are not thinking about their fingers. They're not thinking about their keyboard movements. They are looking at the screen. They're looking at their music. The same way, these really top players are not looking at their bread and butters. They're not focused on that. So they have all this space to say, hey, I'm analyzing exactly what this guy's doing in every situation, and they're downloading information over and over again. And they're saying, okay, when the time comes, I've noticed this one habit, and when the time comes, I'm going to make a count and win the game or the set off of this one read that I know that's going to work. That's a really simple side of it, in my opinion. Even though it's being not seem simple, that's actually the simple side to it. I think the more interesting psychological side is that people are thinking about the idea of beating top players when they're playing them. That is a whole different can of worms. That opening that is crazy. but I will basically try to open it without without kind of getting too deep into that. But the idea is that a lot of players realize that when they beat top people, or when they beat people in their region that are ranked really high, or they beat a PGR player, when they win, they weren't thinking about winning the entire time. They were literally just in this zone. They were in something like it was in like a mental flow. The moment that you start thinking about winning, and the moment that your brain starts thinking about, oh, it would be so cool if I won, I think you've already lost.
Hmm.
Obviously, that's a generalization, but it's
That's
often the
powerful.
case.
I agree.
And oftentimes it's not the case that that like they made like a really crazy mid-set adaptation, but I actually think that a lot of the time it's very psychological, especially when I've played players that I've thought were better than me, or I had this idea in my head that they were better than me. I would always be thinking like I'd be up a game, or it'd be game three, last stock, last hit, someone I've never beaten before, or it would be so awesome if I was able to clutch it out. And I would lose every time because I would just be thinking about that in the situation. And it was kind of crazy. And one thing that I realized was I had to lower my expectations, and I had to basically say, I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to learn. I'm going to play my best. And the thing is, once you're in that flow, and it's not a science. This is not a science at all. Sometimes I'm on it, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm thinking about it, sometimes it just happens. I think making sure that your mind is as clear as possible, meditating, doing like treating your body well is stuff that will help you clear your mind. I think that's actually probably the most important thing in this case. Just making sure that you have like a really good headspace going in.
Yeah, and so I think like the obvious counterpoint to what obvious said about the worst player in that situation when they're going into game three against, let's say, a top player or a player ranked higher than them. The obvious counterpoint is, well, isn't that top player also afraid of being upset? He'll be struggling with that mental aspect as well. But the thing is, to be a top player or to be a higher rated player in a region, I think it's safe to make the assumption that they probably have a stronger mindset than the lower level player anyway. I mean, uh, if you're a higher ranked person in a region or in the world, you almost get upset all the time. I mean, to get to that point, you have to fend off a lot of hungry wolves, and so they're used to being in that situation. They're used to handling the pressure. They're used to those game threes, those games where if they lose, they'll never hear the end of it. They've been in that situation before. The question is, have you been in the situation before where you've been in that game three and and made that upset, converted that upset? You know, and chances are you've probably been in that situation less than they have. So, what's the solution? As Abby was getting at, you have to decontextualize that whole situation. You cannot be thinking about, okay, it's game three against this person. You have to think about it in its most basic terms. Your character versus their character. Your advantages versus their advantages. You have to beat them in the most simplest form. Um, and if for that game you can play the game better than they do, in that context, you'll convert the upset, right? And if you lose and you had a good mindset about it, and you were still thinking about characters and what the characters are doing inside of the TV screen, then at that point you were just the worst player. The other person adapted, was able to punish you for certain mistakes, but this whole situation you've constructed about top player almost making the upset, that really had nothing to do with it at that point. Then at that point, take what you learned from the loss and implement it next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good answer to the question, and I think we hit at it from the important sides. I I don't think that there's any more to it other than, yeah, putting yourself in the situation, understanding that the person that you're playing has likely been in this situation about 3 to 4 times or even more than you have. I think you brought up a really good point, in one of our previous episodes that said there's only one person that goes away from a tournament with only one or less losses. That's the victor. Everyone else has been handed 2 losses. So players like Mita King, Mango, Zero, Nairo have all been handed more losses than you like could even dream of. So just and but the thing is they've been in these high pressure situations so many times that yeah, it's just like a flow to them. They don't I mean obviously they probably have some times where they're probably thinking about like winning, or they're thinking about the money that they'll make for the prize money, or they're thinking about their fans and like and what their fans will think whether they win or lose. So that's a whole different ball game, but the idea is the same. They've been in these situations before and they try to break it down and try to have like a pretty clear headspace about it.
Well, I think we did a great job answering that question. But Diamond Down fan, let us know, what you think about what we said. And for anybody else out there who wants their question answered, go ahead and tweet at Beyond Metagame. There was no room for the, so it's at Beyond Metagame. Tweet us, an anecdote that you've been wrestling with, or some situation you just want us to discuss. Maybe you already have your own answer for it, but you're curious as to what our takes are. So yeah, that'd be lovely. And speaking of Twitters, Abby, where can people find you?
People can find me at A Vaidyanatha. That is my long last name. The link will be on our website and in the show description.
And mine is Peon _ GCE. That's Golf Charlie Echo. And both of our tags we found at Beyond Metagames Twitter. And one more thing, speaking of Twitter, we're doing a giveaway to celebrate the launch of our show. If you're listening to this, you probably already have heard of the giveaway. But if you haven't, it's not too late to join. I was thinking in 1 week from now, we haven't talked about this off the air, we end the deadline before next episode, or when the next episode 5, comes out. This being episode 4. And maybe we can announce it at the beginning of the show and also tweet it out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sounds good. I think that by next Friday we will have decided a winner based off of a raffle.
Yeah, it's going to be completely random unless you have Venmo. My Venmo, no. Yeah, it'll be completely random. All you have to do is retweet and follow our Twitter. Retweet. We have an announcement tweet that says, "Hey, retweet this one for the giveaway," and you'll be entered in the raffle. And you'll have a chance to win Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Additionally, you'll have a spot. We'll shout you out on the podcast, and maybe this is too far, but I'm thinking we put a little wall of fame on our website that has like our guests, maybe some, our contest winners, some other special people that contribute. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. If you win one of our contests, you get to be on our wall of fame.
All right. So that's all for this week, at least for me. Abby, do you got any last minute ball busters?
I think you've been grilling me pretty hard, so I think I've said everything that I need to. I think we did a really good job of breaking down why is tech important, when does it become too much, do you want to be Weed Lord or do you want to be Borp, what's the balance, how do you implement this hard tech in tournament, how do we move the stuff that you've practiced, and now that you know how to practice, how do we move this stuff into the competitive environment. And then we answered a pretty good question that kind of ties like the mental side of things into why am I not able to close out these sets against top players.
Completely agree, my friend. Well, until next time, this has been Beyond the Metagame. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.